What's up guys, Chris Schwartz-Edmisten here from Schwartz-Edmisten Web Design. In today's video, we're going to take a look at this cool hover effect that we're doing with an auto layout section and some custom CSS. And what's cool about this effect is that it's completely keyboard responsive as well. So if I tab through each of these items, you can see that our hover effect is taking effect, just like when we hover over with our mouse. And then the other cool thing is on mobile, we're able to always show that content since there is no hover interaction on mobile. And finally, this is completely responsive. So the height of each item is determined by the height of the amount of content that is in each item. So you'll never get any issues with the text getting cut off or anything like that. You can see as the text wraps and gets taller, each of the items is also getting proportionally taller. And it's because of the way that we've set up this effect. It's completely responsive, it's keyboard navigation friendly, and it's mobile friendly. So I'm gonna be covering how to create this effect from start to finish. So even if you're brand new to CSS, you should be able to follow along. And as always, you can grab the CSS in the description below. I'm gonna do this in an auto layout section because hover effects like this are really difficult if you're trying to do it with blocks in a section. But with the auto layout, the way that the auto layout sections are structured, this type of an effect is super easy. It's not easy, but it's straightforward, I should say. So I'm gonna copy this first paragraph text. So this first one is going to be give. So I'm gonna go to people and I'll just choose this section here. Now I'm gonna fast forward through this part because all I'm doing here is just going back and forth between the mockup and Squarespace and just putting in the content, uploading the images, putting in the title and description, and then adding the button content. So no learning to be done here. Just go ahead and put in your content as needed and we'll pick back up. Okay, so we sort of have these set up. So I'm gonna go to design and we're just gonna do our best to get these as good of a head start before we start writing our CSS as possible. So I definitely want these to be centered. I do want 3, but I want my headings to be much bigger. So I'm gonna do item title. So this is going to be our sort of initial size here. Cool. 1 rem, and then the item button is gonna be 0.9 rem. Okay, so let's go back in to edit this content. Now I think I have all my font sizes dialed in. So I want to go to size and space, and I want this to go full. I want the space between items to be 0. And the space between columns is also, or space between rows is also going to be 0 when they stack. And space between elements, let's go medium. But the space between the image and text should be 0. That looks fine. And the vertical padding for the section, we actually want that to be 0 because we want it to be full width and full height. So there's no gap above and below the section. So I'm going to click these 3 dots and we're going to drag those all the way down. So I'll just need to use a little bit of CSS to get rid of the padding on the sides and then to place the content over the images. And I want them to be all the same height, so that way all the buttons align. All right, so now that we have that set up, we're in pretty good shape. I just need to go ahead and add my CSS for the hover effects. So what I need to do is go to the custom CSS window. So we'll go to Pages, Website Tools, Custom CSS, and let me go ahead and make the window a little bit bigger here. And it should be much easier for you guys to see as I'm writing it. This is an extension that I developed just for myself for recording these videos, so it's not something that you'll be able to find or use, but again, it should help for this recording. So this is going to be the home page hover section styling. And I'm going to directly just grab the data section ID for this section using that handy block identifier plugin. And so now what I can do is right click on the section, and any CSS that we write for this section is only going to apply to this one section. So I'm going to grab the user items list simple, because this is the element that has the padding on the sides. You can see as I hover over it, we have the green. So I'm going to go ahead and target this element inside of these curly brackets. I'll open up some more curly brackets, and we're going to say padding left 0 and padding right 0. And one way to increase my specificity is to add the site wrapper ID. All page contents in Squarespace, so all the sections, your header, your footer, all of the page contents are wrapped in an element that has an ID of site wrapper. So it's directly inside the body. So here we have the main body, and then we have this element called site wrapper, and it has an ID of site wrapper. So because all of our elements on the site lie inside this container, an easy way to increase our specificity so that our CSS will override Squarespace's, because IDs are the most specific type of selector, is to add hashtag site wrapper and then a space. So we're saying inside of this element, we're going to look for this section. Inside of this section, we're going to look for this element, and we're going to make the padding on the left and the right 0. So now this section is spanning the full width, which is great. Oh, it looks like it can't go full screen when my plugin is enabled, so that's good to know. So the next thing that we need to do is go ahead and put this content over the image. So it's interesting because we have the title initially, and then as we hover over the image, we want the title to, I guess, sort of fade out, and we want this content to fade in. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and just place everything over the image, and then we need to align our title to the bottom. And then after that, we'll sort of handle the hover effect. So we need to position this content over the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect the section. And so here we have each list item. And inside of the list item, we have list item media. And then we have list item content. Now, currently, the list item media has an aspect ratio, and so the height of the image is determined by the aspect ratio. So in this case, it's 3:4. I don't really want that. I want the height of the section to be determined by the height of the content. Otherwise, what if the content is taller than the image? It's going to get cut off. So the content should be the thing that dictates the height of this section. So one thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to target the list item media inner, and we're going to have to get rid of the padding, and we're also going to have to make the list item media basically have a position of absolute. So let's start there. Let's target the list item media class, and then I'm going to give it a position of absolute. And I'm going to give it an inset of 0. And right now, so all of the images are being positioned relative to their nearest parent that has a position defined. We want them to be relative to each list item, but there's no position defined. So I'm going to have to come in here to the list item and give it a position of relative. And so now each image is going to, it's only going to take up, its item because it's being positioned relative to the nearest list item. So now each image is spanning its own list item, which is exactly what we want. But as I said before, it's going to be as tall as the list item media inner, because it has the defined aspect ratio with the padding bottom. So I'm going to come in here to the list item media inner, and I'm going to go padding bottom 0, and I'm going to throw an important tag on there just to make sure that applies. But now our list item media inner, it doesn't have a height because its height was set to 0, so that the height could be defined by the padding bottom aspect ratio. So we need to give it a height of 100%. So we're going to go height 100%. I'm going to throw an important tag on that as well. And now we get our image back. Cool. So now each image is just the height of its container, the height of its text, which is what we want. So now we can start sort of playing around with the positioning and stacking of things, because right now our image is on top of our list item content, which we do not want. So let's target our list item content. We haven't done that yet. So I'm going to drop down below and target our list item content. And now we're going to give it a Z index of, we'll do 3. And that brings it on top of the image. So cool. Whoop, I forgot I can't make it full screen when I have this bigger CSS window. I'll turn that off in a second so we can look at it. But if we look at the mockup, so we have some padding here around the content. So we definitely want to add that in on our design. So in the list item content, let's go ahead and add padding. And we want this to be responsive based on the size of the screen. So let's go ahead and do 3 viewport width units of padding. And actually, we might even need different padding on the top and the sides. So on the top and bottom, let's do 5 viewport width units. And on the sides, we'll do 3 viewport width units. And there you go, we get a little bit of padding, which is nice. Okay, so one thing that we can do, let's go ahead and target all of this content, and we need to add an image overlay so we can actually see this content, and we need to turn it white. So let's start by turning everything white. So if we jump in here to the text wrapper, so there's 2 different wrappers in the content class. There's the text wrapper and the button wrapper. So we're going to have to handle them individually. So we have the title, which gets a class of list item content title. So we'll do that. And then we're going to do color, #FFF. And I wonder if it's actually truly white or if it's our palette color. Okay, yeah, so it's our palette color. So I'll copy that and we'll do hashtag our palette color. And now if I right click on the text itself, so it's going to be list item content description P. So we'll do a comma since we want to change both of these things to white. So we want to change the, I guess that works if we change the description. And then we need to target the button. So we want the button text. So this is the list item content button. And I'm going to do this separately since it's going to need different styling than everything else. So for the content, list item content underscore button, we do want the color to be white, and we also want the border color to be white as well, or our palette white. And then on hover, so we're going to take this and we're going to say on hover, we want the background color to be white, and then we want our color to be our palette black color, which I can grab from our button up here. So it's going to be black. Oh, that's interesting. Is our palette color black? I don't think so. I think that's incorrect. So for light 1, I'm going to make sure that all of these buttons are the palette color. Okay. There we go. Okay, so now that the button color is correct, I'm going to inspect the button and we can grab that palette color again. Now that the color is actually correct. And if you hold shift and click on a color, it'll show the hex code, which is cool. So now I can copy the hex code and then find my color here. So on hover, we want the color to be this and the background color to be that. Sorry, just the border color. And actually, maybe we want the border color to be this. So I probably don't want to change it. Yeah, there we go. That looks good. All right, so now we can add an overlay to the image, and I can do that using an after or before pseudo element. So let's go ahead to the list item media. I'm going to come down here and I'll just use a before pseudo element. So pseudo elements are awesome. They're a way to kind of like inject content into the HTML, but through the CSS. So they're super powerful. And so what I can do is I can make the background black. And it's positioned absolute. It's got an inset. So let me do a Z index. It's got to be higher than the image. So for the media, let's give it a Z index of 1, but we'll give the overlay a Z index of 2, which is lower than the Z index of the content, which has 3. So we've sort of like stacked these vertically. So this is the farthest away, the next farthest away, and then our content is the closest to us. And now we can just add an opacity here. So we'll do an opacity of like 0.6. And now we get our overlays back. And I can just see what the actual overlay opacity is. If I select this rectangle, so it's going to be 0.8 actually. Okay, awesome. So that looks good. But the before, let's see, what is this opacity? 63. So basically when it's hovered, it should get darker, which is good to know. So this is actually going to be 0.63. And then when it's hovered, it's going to get darker. So now we can do our hover styles. So let me come down to the bottom. And now I'm going to say when the list item is hovered over, we now want to target content inside of it. And we're going to be doing multiple things. So I'm going to bring a new sort of inside here. I'm going to pull this CSS inside of our hover curly brackets. And one thing that we want to do is change the opacity of this to 0.8. So when the list item is hovered, we're targeting the list item media before pseudo element and changing the opacity to 0.8. So that's great, but it just sort of jumps. There's no smooth transition. So we need to find our before pseudo element, and let's add a transition for the opacity. Let's do 0.3 seconds, and we'll do an kind of a fading of ease. There we go. So now it's much smoother. Perfect. So now what we can do is go to the list item content. So I'll copy this, and inside of our hover media query, so below this, we can target our list item content. And normally we want our list item content to be opacity 0. And then when this list item is hovered over, we want the opacity to be 1. So I'm going to copy this opacity here. And by default, the opacity should be 0. And let's copy the transition that we just wrote. So when we hover over the list item content, now it's fading in. But I just realized, so we can't do the whole content because we want the title to be visible initially. So actually, instead of doing it to the list item content, we want to do it to the list item description and the list item content button. And we're going to make those have opacity 0. And then when the list item is hovered, so list item hover, we're going to fade in that content, and then we want to fade out the list item title. So let me go back here. So the list item content title by default is going to have opacity 1. But when the list item is hovered, oops, don't need the extra period, we're going to do opacity 0. So now only the title is visible, and when we hover over it, the title disappears, and we just need to add our transition to our title. So here we have the description and the button with the transition, and here we're targeting the title and the list item content description. So I could come down here and add the transition like this. And now it's going to fade out how we want it to. But instead of adding this extra line here, because our description is already getting this transition, and here we want to add the transition to the title. If I add it again to the title and the description, I can save just one line of CSS by not having to redeclare it on the title. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and it's the same thing. Okay, great. So now all we have to do is just sort of like manually position our headings where we want them to go. So I'm going to sort of manually position it towards the bottom of the item. So it's sort of in the bottom like 30%. So what I'm going to do is we're going to target the title. Actually, I'm going to need to, let's see, how best to do this. I think it's probably, so all of these things are the same size, but I want the title towards the bottom. So I wonder if I just pull out the title here. All right, let me try something. So I actually do want CSS that only controls the title. So I'm going to pull it off of here and just add the transition to the title, since we're going to be adding title specific CSS anyway. So for the title, I'm going to give it a position of absolute. And that pulls it out of the document flow. So now the height of the title text is no longer calculated as the part of the total height of the section, which is fine. But now I have the ability to position it anywhere in the section, which is exactly what I want. So if I give it a bottom of 30%, it'll be 30% up from the bottom of the section, and then I can give it a text align of center. Let's see. Okay, that does not position it centered. Let me go to the content title. Because I need to give it a width of 100%. And let's see. So I'm adding the padding here. Let's see if adding a box sizing of border box to this is going to fix box sizing border box. Oh no, that doesn't fix the issue. Okay. So I don't want to give this title a width of 100%, it looks like. Okay, so instead I'm just going to position it in the center. So I can get rid of these. So I'm gonna say left. One way we can horizontally center it is by giving it a left of 50% and then a transform translate on the x-axis minus 50%, which moves it back 50% of its own width, and therefore centers it horizontally on the page. So there we go. We now get it fading out. Perfect. As I'm editing this video, I realized that I didn't account for keyboard navigation. So if I just click up here and hit tab to tab through the buttons on the page, when we tab to a button, it still stays hidden and we want that content to be visible. So we can do that in just a one little snippet, which is awesome. So when the list item is hovered, obviously we want this to happen, but we also want it to happen when the list item has content that's focused. So if I go to my list item and we, in the Chrome Inspect tools, we can click over the hover emulator here, and there's one called Focus Within. So basically, if this item has an item inside of it that's focused, we then want all these things to happen. So that's a really easy way to accomplish it. So I'll just add a comma here. So on hover, and also when the list item has focus within, we want all of these things to happen. And now just with that one line of CSS, if I tab to a button, that item now will show its content. So just want to make sure that we're keeping keyboard navigators in mind, and now this is much more complete CSS. So this is totally responsive. Let me go ahead and turn off my custom CSS window thing, and now I can full screen. So this is totally responsive. This text will never get cut off because the height of these sections are determined by the tallest height of the content. So even as I kind of like shrink down my screen here, and as things start to get, you know, pretty squishy, our text is always in view and it's totally responsive, which is just the best. And then eventually these should stack. I'm gonna have to do my own media query to make sure that they don't ever do this. And now there you go. So there's still, the height is still determined by the height of the text. Now on mobile, since there's no hover state on mobile, what I'm gonna have to do is just make it always appear, so not have a hover state. So two things to do: make sure this never happens, and then kind of handle mobile. So let's go ahead and tackle those right now. So I need to figure out at what screen size it's doing that kind of funky thing, and then just make sure that it stacks before that. So if you have the Chrome Inspect tools open as you resize your browser, you get dimensions in the top right-hand corner, which is super nice. So I can see roughly at what size this is gonna be breaking. So it looks like it's the normal breakpoint of 767 pixels. Yep, 767 is the breakpoint. So that's sort of a classic mobile breakpoint in 7.1. And so what I can do is for this user items list simple is what has the display of grid. So if I scroll up, so we have user items list simple, and then we have our grid template columns. So right now it's repeating 3 columns, each one fraction of the page. So on mobile, and oh, you can see that's happening at a min width of 768 pixels. So what we want to do is sort of the inverse of that. So at the bottom here, before our closing curly bracket, in the user items list simple, so before that closing curly bracket, let's see where that is. Oh, okay, I closed it right there. So I'm gonna come inside the final curly bracket here inside of this section. I'm gonna say at media, screen, and max width 767 pixels. So this is our mobile media query. And what we want to do is first we want to target the user items list simple and open up some curly brackets. And this is going to be grid, template, columns, and we only want one column. So I'm going to do one FR. So now on mobile, it just immediately stacks. It doesn't go to like the weird 2 and then 1. So that's working exactly how we want it to. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to make sure that our list item title we want to override all these styles. So we want it to be position relative. Let me go down to the mobile view. Position relative, opacity 1. Bottom, we'll do unset. Kind of reset all these styles here, unset. And transform of none. There we go. So that content's back at the top. And then we can get our description and our button. So I'll grab those. Under our title, I'll paste that in, and we don't need the transition. We just want to make the opacity 1. There we go. So this is our mobile view. And then we want to make sure that on hover, well, actually, we'll just make sure that the content title is included in here. Add a comma and make sure that it's always 1 on mobile, even on hover. So I'll add an important tag and now it won't fade out. Awesome. And then we definitely need much more padding here. So let me go to the list item content. And then for the padding, let's do maybe like 30 pixels. Let's do 30 pixels by 6 viewport width units. Maybe 50 pixels. So this is the padding on the top and the bottom. Maybe let's do 80 pixels. Just want to make sure they're spaced out enough so they feel like their own things. Maybe I'll go 90. Yeah, that seems better. Okay, sweet. So now if we go back to desktop, we have this cool hover effect and the buttons are clickable, and then it looks really good and scales really well down on mobile as well. All right, that was a good exercise in custom CSS. Let me go ahead. So I highlighted everything and hit Shift and then Tab, and that just sort of like organizes everything. It lines everything up if there is like improper spacing anywhere. And I hate when there's trailing curly brackets like that. It just makes it harder to read. So I'm going to clear some space in here, and that way it can be on the same line. And now everything is looking good. So finally, at the end, I'm just going to denote that this is the end of this chunk since it is a really long one. So I'm going to say end. And when I do the end, I don't include these lines. I just do it like that. And I'll add some dashes just to make it a little more obvious. There we go. All right. So one thing you might have noticed as I'm writing my custom CSS, I write my custom CSS in the order that the elements appear in the DOM. So I started with the section, which houses all of the contents. And then inside, I started with the user items list simple. So that's this element here, user items list simple. Then we have all of our list items. So that's what I wrote next in the CSS. So here we have all of our list items. Inside of that, first comes the list item media, then comes the I added in the before pseudo element inside of the list item media. So that's our overlay. Then we have the list item content. And then here we have list item media inner because that's inside of the list item media, which still comes before the list item content. And then inside of the content, we have the text wrapper and the button wrapper, and the title comes first and then the description. So I put the description first, then the button. I have the title and then the description because the title comes first. Then I have just the title text. We have just the button text, our button hover. And then here we have our kind of like, here's our hover styles. So I have our normal styles first, and then I have our hover styles. And again, all of this is written in the order that it appears in the DOM. And that just makes it easier to read from a CSS perspective, and also kind of just helps me for my just logic in like understanding the structure of the sections and how I write the CSS. If I ever need to go edit this in the future, I just sort of understand that there's a logical flow to how I'm writing my CSS. So I think that's really important. So this is, other than it's like a little bit hard to read because I like to do nesting. So for a CSS beginner, like it might be confusing that there's 3 different curly brackets here. But because, you know, this isn't for the client to ever edit, this is just my CSS, and nesting saves on repeating selectors. I like to nest my CSS. So it's pretty clean, it's pretty readable, and I would consider this, you know, well-written CSS. All right, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy step-by-step CSS content like this, I think you might be interested in checking out some of the workshops that are on my website. They're in-depth, step-by-step CSS tutorials like this where you can create custom functionality. I have a custom header tutorial and also a custom boxed content tutorial. So if you did like this video, then I definitely think you'll enjoy those as well. And if you're looking for more Squarespace customization content like this, then please consider subscribing to the channel, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.